All right, we've got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Hello there, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, From Drupal to WordPress, the benefits of migrating your CMS. My name is Paige, and I am responsible for kicking off the webinar and organizing any audience questions for our panelists to answer a little later on in the webinar. Before we start our very insightful conversation today, I want to address a few housekeeping items. First, a quick reminder that we are recording this webinar. Within about 24 hours, we will share it out with all of our registrants via email, so just keep a lookout for that. Secondly, the chat feature has been disabled for today's webinar. However, we do encourage you to send in your questions for our panelists via the Q&A feature that you can find at the bottom of your screen. While we likely won't be able to get through all of the questions, please do not be afraid to ask them throughout. We are excited to see them come through. Finally, in just a moment, you will see a polling question pop up on your screen, and we'd love to hear about your experience and history with Drupal and WordPress and all other CMSs. So let me launch that poll here. All right, I'll give you a few seconds. And just a note, it is multiple choice. I know many individuals might be using multiple CMSs or have experience using multiple. So please feel free to, check all those answers and let us know what your experience is here. All right, we're seeing a lot of WordPress users. However, we're seeing quite a bit of Drupal users as well. All right, I'm going to end that poll here. All right, just as I expected, we see a lot of WordPress users, but a lot of Drupal 7 or earlier users on the call today. And our experienced speakers and panelists are eager to share their experiences, knowledge, and best practices with you all. Thank you all for sharing. However, I think it's time to dive into the reason that you're all here today. So to kick off the conversation today, I am going to hand the mic over to our host and moderator for today's webinar, James Hall. James, over to you.
Thank you, Paige. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to host you all this evening. I'm James Hall. I'm the director of our partner accounts team over in EMEA for WP Engine. I've been at WP Engine for about 5 and a bit years and had the pleasure of working alongside people like Scott, who was one of our strategic partners. And WP Engine, if you don't know us, are a leading WordPress managed hosting platform. And we work with our partners to help brands and agencies alike get the most out of WordPress. And that really is, a part of our discussion today is how can you view Drupal? How can you view WordPress? How can you potentially consider a migration from one to the other and get the most out of that platform? We want to think about that in different phases in terms of the why. And we also want to talk about the potentially how you might go about doing that. So Scott Jones is going to walk us through more of that why story now. And then we'll open up to the panelists and we'll talk about some of that how piece. Scott, over to you.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you for having me today. I'm just going to find a way to share my screen. It's going to be one moment to do that. Is that sharing okay?
We're seeing the presenter view, it looks like.
Oh, very sorry. Okay, one second. Is that sharing correctly?
There we go. That looks great.
We had some challenges with this before we jumped on, so yeah, thanks for bearing with us on that. Yeah, really excited to bring this topic to you today on Drupal versus WordPress. Just before we dive into the main content, I thought I'd share a little bit on what my background is, what experience do I actually have on this topic. So I've been running a digital agency for the last 11 years, but before that I did work as a marketing director for a charity here in the UK. We operated a Drupal website that we eventually replaced for WordPress, and it really completely transformed how we publish content. I even might go as far as to say liberated the way that we work, but also the interaction that we had with our audience. And so I have a lot of experience in that transition process and what that meant since. But today I lead Illustrate Digital. We're a digital agency based in the UK, and we specialize in builds, migrations, and maintenance of websites, predominantly in regulated sectors, and specifically utilizing the WordPress platform. Onto some of the background of where the data comes from for today's session that I'm going to talk through. My team and I have spent months, literally months, and James can attest to this, researching the trends in the CMS space, particularly at the enterprise level. And partly out of professional curiosity, but also we wanted to properly and better understand the decline of the once sort of more mighty platforms that we were observing, that we were having conversations with our clients about. When people were coming to us and asking us to migrate them away from a platform, we really wanted to understand why that was and what the decline was that we were seeing on certain platforms, but also the rise on other platforms as well. And so we published our report just on Friday last week called The Great CMS Exodus, which looks at the data behind the rise of the platform choices and also the fall of platform choices across the internet. It aims to predict why these changes are taking place and also look at some of the data on what the actual trends are telling us. So why is this a good time to actually talk about Drupal? Well, let's look at some of the data behind this. This data that I'm going to share all comes from the Built With Technology Profiler that scans all the world's websites to understand what powers them, what frameworks and technologies are behind them. And to start with, the graph on the left shows us Drupal's trends across the top 1 million websites. We can fairly well assume that this is quite enterprise and that these are enterprise brands, the top 1 million websites by traffic on the internet. You can see that Drupal has seen a decline in usage since around 2021. And if we jump across to the right-hand side, you can then see Drupal trends across the entire internet as well. So interestingly, it's seen a decline as early as 2013, which was quite a while ago, and more recently and more significantly since 2021. This does mean that enterprise brands maybe were holding on for a little longer. It does make sense due to maybe more technical debt, needing larger scale digital transformation. Quite a lot more work goes into it and more hesitancy in moving. So we would expect enterprise brands to trail behind the rest of the market a little bit. But now they have also started to maneuver away. And so you'd expect the 1 million, top 1 million to follow the rest of the internet's trend. If we zoom in a little bit more on this and we look at Drupal 7 particularly, well, Drupal version 7 is really interesting because it reaches end of life in January 2025. And so when we look at the data for Drupal 7, you do see a far more dramatic decline, which I guess is what we would expect. But Drupal 7 reaching end of life this coming January means no more feature development, no more security updates. And if you're running version 7 from January, you're pretty much on your own with operating that version of the platform. This is the kind of shift in trend we would expect to see for an end-of-life product. But 180,000 websites are still using Drupal 7. And so, yeah, if we sort of look at the trends for the top 1 million and the rest of the internet, you'll see that they are both quite significantly down on Drupal 7, as we expect, but still very, very high usage. So Drupal 10, by comparison, that was the latest version up until August this year. That only has 75,000 installs currently, so less than half of Drupal 7. And Drupal 11, which only came out this year, has 1,300. So you would expect this. It was only released recently. You wouldn't expect far more usage on that than that. But interestingly, this is not the first time that Drupal has tried to shelve version 7. Too many people were using it. And so we've actually already seen versions 8 and 9 of Drupal come and go and reach their end of life. And this is really, really interesting because some businesses are currently plowing quite a lot of time and effort into the still growing Drupal 10 in terms of the trend increasing for that, despite version 11 having only released in August this year. But better yet, if you're actually launching a Drupal 10 site in 2025, it is worth bearing in mind that its end of life date is already set in 2026, and they've pretty much committed to that 2-year cycle now. So that makes this really interesting. It also means that we would expect versions 8 and 9 to come and go, but they still haven't been as popular as version 7, and the majority of brands across 7, 8, 9, across 8, 9, 10, and 11, the majority of brands are still utilizing version 7, which is getting shelved in January, which is really, really interesting. But why are organizations actually moving away from Drupal? Well, let's take a little look at this. Some of it we've already spoken about. So it's the end of life for several versions. It's not just a case of just hitting update. It's often a full rebuild. And it will be the same thing in 2 years' time. So when it releases another major upgrade, there's quite a lot of work to do to get to that next version that gets released. There's also, as we've also mentioned, the buildup of technology debt. So new features and functionality are being developed on old underlying software and frameworks, and that becomes more challenging over time. As a society and as development teams, we now develop differently and with more agility than we once used to. So we're getting better at that over time. But on the whole, tech debt has been built up around particularly Drupal 7. And there's also a change in enterprise decision makers. So this was once a very developer-led conversation, and it's now more of a collaboration between marketing teams, development teams, security teams, all alike. But from a day-to-day perspective, marketers are the ones most impacted by the CMS choice. And so we're now seeing a change, whereas once it was the developer making the primary decision for the platform, it's now a really good collaboration between the people that it affects day to day, the ones publishing the content in the marketing teams, and also a shift in the decision making of development teams also towards other platforms that are slightly more progressive than maybe Drupal is. So let's look forward instead of backwards. What should you consider moving to instead? Well, this CMS Exodus report also captures a lot of the trends up. And so to look at a couple of examples, Next.js is not a CMS platform in itself, but it does give a nod towards usage of headless or decoupled architectures, so separating the front and back end of your website. And Next.js, amongst the top 1 million sites on the internet, captures 50,000 of that top million by traffic. And if we take a little look at another example with Shopify, the trend is also highly up of usage of Shopify. If you know anything about it, you could probably expect exactly that. But interesting that it's up in the enterprise space as well, and it captures around 29,000 of that top 1 million. Our recommendation, though, is WordPress. By far, this outstrips any other platform. It captures 229,000 of the top million sites by traffic, and it captures 34 million of the entire internet. So it is vast, and you can see by the trends that it's still on the rise. So of all content managed websites, that's about 41% of all websites that are content managed. And the second biggest data set, or the second biggest choice for platform, is actually labeled as other and not a secondary platform. So that makes for really, really interesting reading. I spoke to another agency owner yesterday, and it wasn't a loaded question, but I asked his views on which platform he recommends to his clients, and he also aligned with this view. He said WordPress by far is still the best CMS. It's still trending up. And until it gets really credible competition with something else that's got really high usage, he'll continue to recommend it for both small businesses and enterprises alike, which really reflects the view that we've got as a development agency as well. So to quote the famous lyrics of The Clash, should I stay or should I go? So If you're currently on the Drupal platform, you probably should stay if your priority is towards development teams and developer frameworks. If it's developers predominantly making the choice, then that might be a really good reason to stay, especially if they're already familiar with the platform. You might actually prefer to rebuild and replatform and take the opportunity to refresh every 2 or 3 years, and that might be a good reason to stay. It's also a really good place to be if you have a really highly complex architecture, particularly if you've got a lot of that tech debt sort of all tied up as well. And it's harder for your organization to make that move across to another platform. It might be easier and better to sell your organization on Drupal as it currently is. Stay with Drupal if you are prepared to invest higher initial and ongoing in terms of the cost, because it is more complex, it does take longer to develop, and therefore will cost more. If you've got a longer time to market, more time to actually develop, then Drupal is a good place to be thinking about as well. And finally, and genuinely, if your organization is not actually ready to accept a platform like WordPress and have more of a progressive conversation as an enterprise solution, and you've got some decision makers that are dead against it, then it might be that you actually want to stay on the Drupal platform for a little longer while you work out how to convince those decision makers. But why would you move to WordPress? Well, move to WordPress if your priority is towards marketing teams and the ease of content publishing, like we've already spoken about. If you prefer to iterate and continually improve on the experience, and so WordPress releases gradual updates over time without these big end-of-life events happening, and so it's easier to keep up with the pace of development. If you need quicker sites deployed faster, you want to be more flexible and you want more agility, then growth for growth and campaigns, WordPress is a really good platform. If you're more budget conscious and you're looking for a better return on investment, which we'll look at a little bit more in a second, then WordPress is also a really fantastic choice. And if you are looking to rebuild and you're looking to go to market more quickly and deploy more swiftly, then WordPress is definitely a better choice over Drupal. And finally, if your organization is a bit more open-minded, it is willing to innovate, and it is more progressive, particularly if you wanted to combine it with maybe a headless or decoupled infrastructure, then WordPress makes for really, really good for a really good choice in that regard as well. So some really good considerations there between staying with Drupal and moving to WordPress. On the total cost of ownership side and return on investment, so both of these platforms, both Drupal and WordPress, offer a really good benefit of being open source, and therefore they have lower costs with no licensing fees. So that's not something you have to worry about. And that's a really big advantage if you're not having to pay, $50,000 or pounds or whatever currency before you actually start to develop anything just on a license fee. So that's a really, really, really good place to start. But as we talk about in terms of the complexity of build, maintenance, security, backups, and all of those other things, WordPress really does outstrip Drupal from the complexity, from the learning curve, and therefore overall you do get a far better total cost of ownership in the longer term, and a better return on the same investment. So investing the same money will return more features, more agility with WordPress than it will with Drupal, which is really, really key for decision making between the two platforms. So before we close, I wanted to go through a couple of the benefits for marketers of utilizing WordPress and also for technical teams. So first of all, as we've just said, a better return on investment if you're having to sell this into your business when it comes to WordPress. You can also utilize budget for features you actually need rather than ones you feel compelled to develop for. It is really, really good for intuitive content management. It's a far easier, and this is where WordPress wins against all of the platforms, is it is much easier to utilize. It's more familiar and it doesn't take long to get used to. And it is also easier to train on, easier to use, and especially for junior team members. And so the sort of like block structure, the iterative design, all of that comes together to make it much, much better and much easier for marketing teams to publish content on. So what about technical teams? So for technical teams, there is a more gentle learning curve and also less risk with more choice available, more answers, and more community support. Both Drupal and WordPress have fantastic communities, but it's without doubt that WordPress has a far bigger, far greater community behind it. You can adopt a platform with WordPress that's still trending up and not down, which is a really important consideration for future-proofing and decision-making. It's the most well-supported CMS on the market by far when it comes to integrations, plugins, and tooling. And so, for example, if you wanted to add HubSpot to your WordPress site, it's really easy, it's really straightforward. Not a lot of effort has to go in there because HubSpot have done the effort for you to build a plugin you can use. And it's also really highly adaptable and scalable, as both Drupal and WordPress are, but WordPress has come strides in recent years to be really adaptable and scalable for technical teams, which is where we are seeing the choice shifting a little in recent years for developers as well. So just a final word from me on the how. There are a couple of really good resources that you can go and grab hold of. And so the one on the left is our WordPress versus Drupal guide, written as a collaboration between WP Engine and Illustrate Digital. You can go and download that from WP Engine's resource library, and it unlocks a lot more of the information we've spoken about today, comparisons on the costs, return on investment, the features. It's really, really rich. It's quite a few pages, and it looks quite beautiful as well. I'm not going to lie. And then we've also got the great CMS Exodus over on the right-hand side. So if you link through to that, and if you're a geeky sort of CMS advocate like I am, then there's a lot of data in there that you can rely on for the trends in the space. You can look at what's trending up, what's trending down, and how to have conversations with your internal stakeholders or your clients alike about those trends and the decisions that you make about your CMS platform in the future. So yeah, thank you for listening to this today. Really excited to dive into some of the panel sessions, and I'm going to hand back to James Hall.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was a great walkthrough. And just to recap, again, there will be sharing those links in a follow-up email post the webinar, so you can get access to those guides. But now I think this is a great chance to bring in our other panelists. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Emily. Emily, are you there? Give us a quick walkthrough of you and your experiences, please.
Yes, sure thing. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Emily Averill. I am the Digital Marketing Director at Daniels Health. We are a global healthcare company and based in our head office in Chicago. And in 2016, our websites were built on Drupal 7. And when I joined the team in Feb of last year, we were still on Drupal 7. And the team had actually undergone an attempted migration. They tried to upgrade. They kind of spent about a year on that. It was ultimately unsuccessful. And so I then spearheaded the project, went into it quite platform agnostic, but I knew what we wanted out of it, and ended up selecting WordPress. And so we're currently in the process of migrating, going live January of next year. Thank goodness, considering that's when 7's being sunset anyway. So yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you, Emily. Definitely got some questions to fire your way shortly on the reasons why you might want to migrate across. But I would like to bring in Peter John next.
Yep. Hey guys, my name is Peter John. I'm the CTO of Useful Group. So we're a development agency based out of Chicagoland. We've done a lot of custom migrations between different platforms. We do a lot of custom WordPress development. And part of what we're trying to do is really bridge the gap between marketing and development to really allow for an enterprise level of both. We're partners with Daniels Health, and we've done a lot of large Drupal migrations in the past and a lot of custom WordPress websites. And a lot of the focus there for us is just making sure that everything's accounted for from a pre-launch perspective as well as post-launch perspective. You know, what does it take to make sure the SEO is migrated, all the content's migrated? And we've done a lot of work in the regulated industries and other places where like that level of detail really matters. How do we make sure that from a big shift, not only externally to the end customer, but also internally from a workflow perspective is maintained and managed?
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter John. And finally, Chandan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chandan. I'm a web development manager at Bluetext. I was actually a Drupal developer 8 years ago, and then I've moved to WordPress. So I've worked with both platforms for over 11 years now. Bluetext is actually agency based out of Washington, D.C. We do a lot of custom WordPress development. 90% of our projects are WordPress, but 10% are Drupal as well at the same time. So yeah, thank you so.
Brilliant stuff. We'll come back to you shortly, Chandan, but I want to kick off with Emily. Tell us a little bit more about, the business case that you put together for wanting to consider a change in the first instance, and then how WordPress ended up being that choice.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, obviously, in some ways, I think the team initially felt, the hand was forced. We're on 7. We need to upgrade, and so it was just we have to do this. But I took the opportunity to pause and identify. It's been years now since the site was built. What are the outcomes we want from this project? And so the themes that continued to emerge as I worked across the business, working across key stakeholders, marketing, development, IT, cybersecurity, but then also just our wider team in general. I really identified, like most organizations, we've got aggressive growth goals. And so we wanted a platform that could grow with us. And what that meant for us at a practical level is that I wanted our team to be really well positioned to respond to business opportunities, but instead, the website wasn't a place that our team could work confidently or with pace or agility. It was a friction point. And so we wanted a platform that could grow with us as an organization, ease of use. I mean, we kind of heard from this from Scott, but in terms of as marketeers, like we were often having to escalate our support and get complex code, support for what we're trying to achieve. And so as much as we wanted to make sure that the front end of the site, for our visitors was offering a better user experience, I also wanted our team to have ease of use within the CMS. And then the third was, and I know this really probably could have been achieved across whatever platform, but site performance. The site built in 2016, it wasn't really optimized for mobile. We weren't hitting accessibility standards we wanted to. Obviously, security concerns, totally that. The latency in our system, like the tech debt referring to before, that was us. And so it did mean that from the outset, there was probably a lean towards, let's just stay with Drupal because we do have this tech debt, we've got complexity. But I really felt that through the discovery process, I felt that yes, it was going to be a hard migration, but in order to achieve the outcome, the future state we really wanted, it was going to be worth it. And between the ecosystem of plugins that helps our team, the user experience of WordPress and the CMS, and frankly, really finding a partner in the useful group who've been our WordPress guides throughout this process is that's why we went where we went.
Emily, thank you for that. And I really want to stay in the why now before we get into the sort of the technical details of the how. But Peter John, let me bring you in. And how did you help Emily and the team choose that WordPress route, and why was it, from your perspective, the right platform of choice?
Yeah, I think, WordPress has always been more marketer focused, right? And even back to the origin of where did WordPress and Drupal started, they both started as how do we create a relational blog platform, right? One was more focused on development, which was Drupal, and one was focused more on marketers, which was WordPress. And now that we've had the tenure of those platforms, WordPress being really focused around marketing has really allowed it to build up the developer tools around it that are either equivalent or surpass Drupal. And so even as we talked with Emily and really dove into their needs, a lot of it was like, how do we adapt quickly from a marketing perspective? How do we own this ourselves so that the team that's partnered with us from a technical perspective is helping us fix technical problems, not helping us do marketing, right? And so a lot of the focus was, okay, we've got complexity, it's a global brand, we've got translation, got a lot of content that has to be shifted over regardless of whether we're doing an upgrade or switching to WordPress. And so really that core focus of, even as a development team on our side, how do we help you as the customer make sure that your marketing is uninhibited so that the moment that you learn new data, you can put that data into place with really the only tickets having to go to development teams or developers being around new features that haven't been done before, new initiatives that will allow for additional opportunity, not maintaining and just continuing to iterate with the stuff that's already been, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. Chandler, you've used both platforms quite a lot now, right? Scott referenced ROI calculators, and from your perspective, what is the most cost-efficient platform in the short term and perhaps that longer term view as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we recently had an example. We recently migrated Coupa.com from Drupal to WordPress, and it's one of the very, as Scott mentioned in his presentation, it was complex architecture, but their timeline was really less. They wanted to do it in 2 months, which was very tight deadline, and they decided to move away from Drupal because when they came to us as a client, we told them like it's not going to be possible. So I would say cost effective wise, it was better for them to migrate from Drupal to WordPress, and then all their features that were built in within the Drupal platform, we were able to migrate it to WordPress. So I would say cost effective wise, WordPress was definitely worth for them. It definitely required a little bit of training for them, for their content editors, because they were used to like editing content in Drupal. So we had to go through from some of the content trainings to just explain how WordPress is different from Drupal, and how it is, how Node is different from custom post types and all that. So we built that using ACF as well. So yeah, I think that was very cost effective options for them, and we launched it last month, and since then they're on the moon. They're very happy about it.
Very good. Now, this is one I would like to have you guys just discuss. I'm going to go to Scott first of all, but it's that notion of selling internally, right? We've all got to try and think about taking someone from A to B. They have to come on the journey with us, different teams, different levels, different departments, etc. Scott, you've worked with multiple clients through a transition, not necessarily just Drupal, but change. Tell us what are some of your tricks in your toolbox that you lean to.
Yeah, I think I echo what Emily said earlier on. I think back to when I was in that same position and I had to go to my internal director team and have that conversation, and it was about pushing on some of the pain points and some of the issues that we had as an organization at that point in time. So we cannot connect with our audience quite as well as we would be able to if we got onto the other side of this challenge. And so we often found that by the time that we launched a campaign, because we had to wrangle the CMS harder, actually the campaign had almost already passed and we couldn't really then engage with the audience. Like Peter John said, a lot of the work that we do now these days is in the regulated sectors, but a lot of that particularly within financial, professional services, healthcare, in those markets, quite often it's very reactive marketing that they have to do. So in the UK, the new budget comes out or the Prime Minister issues a statement. How do they react to that statement? By publishing content that's really useful. How does that, get up to the top of Google as quickly as possible? Well, pushing on some of those pain points of currently we can't do that. We simply can't make that happen with the speed and ease and agility that we need to be able to not think about how do we design this, or how do we get a developer involved with, technical complexity. Like Peter John said, just get the technical stuff out of the way so that the marketers can actually publish their content, but do that with consistency, with brand ease. Again, for us, a lot of those conversations are around how do we consolidate multiple marketing teams in multiple international territories, get them to all publish the same content that in a way that looks, well, not the same content, different content in a way that looks the same, feels the same, that's relevant for their audience, but that is consistent across all of those. And all of that, the culmination of all of that is that it's far easier to do that in the WordPress platform, as my, co-panelists have said, than it is on the Drupal platform, as was our experience back in the day when that was the case for us, and I was trying to market that as well.
Any other panelist comments on selling internally? And
yeah, one thing I was thinking of, and even Scott, as you were talking about there, is there's usually a little bit of that complexity between IT teams and marketing, right? And what makes people feel secure while enabling that next level flexibility around marketing. And I think the industry as a whole has really come a long way in making IT teams feel better about the WordPress ecosystem. Part of it is just the adoption rate across the board and the amount of people contributing into the ecosystem from a security perspective. But also even just infrastructure wise, right? Something we talk about often with tech teams just to get them bought in is talking through, the enterprise level of what does hosting an enterprise website look like, no matter what CMS you have, right? And things like having the proper environments, the auto deploys, testing, all those things matter from a technical perspective. And there's some great options out there. And I think WordPress has really built that up in a big way. I think, again, that kind of focus of it's a marketing tool that's driven a lot of business, and that's allowed developer teams to really get behind and push it further versus, COVID was actually a great example of this where, the first week of COVID, all of our healthcare partners were like, we need to change everything about everything today, right? And our Drupal partners were saying those same things, right? But the Drupal workflow historically was, okay, for anything that we can't do today, we got to get a developer involved. We got to have a ticket. We got to go through testing, and that regimented a specific workflow, which has a reliability in the long term. But now that WordPress has that same workflow, but has more of the marketing focus, it really allowed us. We saw a pretty significant positive response to that first week of being able to just these marketing teams that had to change everything about what they were doing within a week, and their ability to actually do that and make an impact for their end customers to serve them really made a difference.
And I also just wanted to touch on the security concern. I think I might have even noticed somebody asked a question about, sorry, James, not to steal your thunder. I know we've got questions later, but while we're sort of on the topic in terms of managing kind of internal concerns, that was definitely this thought that WordPress was not as secure as Drupal was a concern from our IT team, cybersecurity, some of our key leadership stakeholders in the process. And so what I found to be very helpful was bringing in, so we'd identify the useful group as a partner that we wanted to work with on this project, and bringing them in and connecting them from the outset with IT, with cybersecurity, addressing those concerns. We actually conducted a security questionnaire that was very thorough. And what I did find is that sometimes they were dated concerns. So there was this thought that maybe Drupal is used by more enterprise companies. And so to bring up some fresh data to actually present in those conversations was sometimes surprising. And, people are then seeing it through a different lens, but also just engaging, marketing, I think, does have the tendency, I can say this because I'm in that team, but they have the tendency of being like, surprise, IT, we've got something that launches tomorrow. You're going to love it. And then have them be like, whoa, so many integrations you have not considered, we're stressed. And so what we tried to do instead is make sure that they had buy-in from the very beginning. Before this project began, they were able to input and make sure that there were considerations on the table throughout the process of the project that in marketing we might not have been across. So now that we're coming towards the tail end of this, the IT team and the cybersecurity team are incredibly invested and have had a lot of input throughout.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And then, so let's pick up that then. So we've got the buy-in now at this point in the journey. It's now the questions coming through of like, okay, how are we going to do this? And, Peter John, I want to start with you in terms of like, how do you start a smooth transition ultimately?
Yeah, so some of the stuff that we focus on first is really just understanding the current landscape, right? And there's some of that that's CMS agnostic, but understanding what's the current sitemap, what's the current content architecture, and really having that mapped out in detail really allows you to have a map of what are we doing when we get to the new site. Because sometimes the new site might have a different content architecture, but you still got to account for everything, especially from an SEO perspective, right? And so really kind of at the front end, being aware of what is the whole of the website, especially a website over, as Emily, as you talked about, over 8 years, there's a lot of changes that happen, and there's less commonly one person that really knows everything that's going on in their website, right? And so having that upfront, really deep dive from a research and discovery to understand when we talk about migrating, what's most important. Are we cross-referencing GA4 data and SEMrush data, and to understand not only what's the extent of content, but what's important content, what's the content that we absolutely need to make sure performs at the same level and better levels post-migration.
Yeah. And Chandan, from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges with migration that you have to be mindful of?
Yeah, exactly. I think one I already spoke about is the training that requires and differentiate between WordPress and Drupal, right? Like when content editors go in, they still are visualizing this as a Drupal site, which it's not. But so they like explain them. It's like how is it different, and that's actually the biggest challenge. And apart from this, I would say we were able to migrate all the custom coding. A lot of people have perspective and think that, okay, you can't do actually a lot of custom coding in WordPress. But as I said, like we had a perfect example of this was a complex architecture, and we moved all the custom code from Drupal to WordPress. Like it was in custom modules built in Drupal. But I wouldn't say that was a challenging part, but it was definitely I would say a different way of because coding in WordPress is different than how you because in Drupal you use twig templating and all that. So it was a little bit challenging to actually get that functionality sorted and then move that to WordPress. So these are the two biggest challenges, I think. And then also a third thing I wanted to add on here is when we are talking to the teams and just explaining the difference between these two platforms, it just for the client to understand from the marketing, as Emily said, from the marketing team, we had like 4 or 5 sessions with them, apart from content editor trainings as well, to understand them how WordPress operates and how is it different from. So a couple of meetings and some sessions with them to just help them understand how it is different and better.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you. Scott, from your perspective, what when you think about the ongoing maintenance, is there a difference? What does it look like with WordPress ultimately? Is it client specific?
I think Shandan might be better at answering that, or maybe Peter John than I might be from a maybe a more technical perspective potentially.
Definitely, I can add on, Scott, if you want me to.
No, you start.
So yeah, for sure. I would say maintenance, you're asking about like on how is it different in Drupal and WordPress? That's the question, right?
Yeah, in terms of when you think about supporting a client going forward from a maintenance standpoint, maintenance contracts, do you see there being a difference between the two platforms? Is there anything you have to be aware of with WordPress?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different. I would say costing wise, that's the first difference. If you're maintaining a Drupal site, that's definitely going to cost you more. The reason being is because Drupal is even when you upgrade a module in Drupal, you have to just of course go into the release note and make sure there is no patch that's needed. Sometimes you do upgrade and one module is like dependent on a lot of other things and your whole functionality breaks. Similar to WordPress, it's less cost effective because you get lots of more updates with WordPress plugins that I've seen. Like every week or every 2-3 days, there's more plugin. You still have to go through the release notes, but definitely it's just less burden on the WordPress side of things. And comparing both of these platforms, I've seen when you're upgrading a WordPress site or WordPress plugin or a WordPress, I would say core version as well, I've seen very less chances of site going down, even if you're trying on lower environments like dev and staging, rather than if you do it on Drupal. There's a lot of things, a lot of dependencies between the fields, the custom fields that you have used, so it tends to break, and you have to investigate more time and effort. As I said, it's always more expensive to always keep Drupal site up to date.
Yeah, understood.
I think certainly when we think about the infrastructure that we put together when utilizing WordPress, because it's very easy to think, okay, well, WordPress has got this huge plugin library we can take advantage of, but actually just diving in with plugins isn't always the best approach to take. So we really want the minimum number of plugins possible, but really it's more about the quality than necessarily the quantity. So, you know, doing simple things like looking at the number of reviews it has in the repository and when it was last updated, what version it's compatible with, you know, all of those normal things around, you know, technology compatibility, but then also thinking, okay, well, if this is something relatively easy to develop, then let's develop it rather than utilize an existing plugin. if we're completely reinventing the wheel, like reinventing e-commerce or reinventing ticket booking or something like that, then of course going with an existing plugin or an existing integration, like I mentioned HubSpot before, like don't reinvent the HubSpot wheel. HubSpot have done it for you. It's advocated by HubSpot. Like, why wouldn't you use that? So I think, thinking about the architecture from that perspective can really help with what Shandan said as well around not ending up with a huge library of plugins that randomly update at different times, but also not ending up with a huge amount of custom solutions that you have to personally keep on top of that are already developed for you by someone else. And it's balancing sort of the beauty of the ecosystem with, you having a good architecture that you can build upon going forward.
Even just echo that, something we've found, because developers and marketers, they kind of want the same thing. Developers want to just work on code and marketers want to market. And usually where there's inefficiencies is when both of those people are kind of doing the other people's jobs, right? And I think WordPress really allows people, what we've seen is a well-built WordPress site, to your point, Scott, really allows marketers to both do the marketing and actually keep a certain amount of their own website up to date, right? Strategically knowing, hey, we're going to use this plugin because we need this tool, and it's a well-made large plugin, means that they're putting a lot of time into their updates. And what we found is even our marketing teams that we work with are often able to do site maintenance within the WordPress ecosystem with a well-built site, because the things that are niche are built in and you don't have to worry about, and the things that are big are being taken care of by full other developer teams. And that's really allowed a streamlining of both the managing the marketing perspective, but also managing the nominal upgrades. And really, in a lot of ways, what that does is reduce costs, right? Because then developers are working on code, and when there's real big changes, new stuff, and marketers are able to manage a lot of the rest.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much, folks. We've got a whole bunch of questions that have started coming in from the audience that I really want to get stuck into. The first one is around, what happens to someone's website if they're on Drupal 7 today, come January, the site's going to be turned off? Is the content still live? What options do they have?
I can answer that question. So actually, nothing. Your site is not going to go down. End of life means you will stop getting updates from Drupal. So Drupal have as Scott mentioned, is also like WordPress have a strong community, which is an open source platform, and people do commit and constantly keep modules up to date. So when it says end of life, it means you will stop getting updates, and that means your site is vulnerable to security risk. You won't be even getting any security patches that WordPress does, and you won't get anything in that sort. But your site won't go down. That's for sure.
Good stuff. That's pleasing to hear. Emily, you touched on this as well about the security concerns that some may have when considering WordPress and trying to sell that to others within the business. So I just want to open this up to the other three really to talk about that. Who would like to hit on that one first? Maybe Peter John, do you want to go there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, I think data matters, right? Being able to get data in front of people so that they can understand the ecosystem as a whole, so they can see what is the adoption rate, what's the pool even of available developers, right? It's got to be interesting to see data on not just what the website, but even I'd imagine that there's a similar drop-off on amount of developers using Drupal, right? Because there are other great systems out there now if you're looking for a development first framework, whether it be headless and things along those lines, right? And so in that sense, bringing people back into a little bit of like hey, how you feel because you read a blog post 8 years ago, right, might not be the reality of the ecosystem. And let's bring a whole lot more data into it to understand how many partners are available to us, what's the hosting infrastructure look like, and who are the partners with the hosting infrastructure to manage security. And I think those pieces that are more available now really help contextualize people into the reality of kind of where the ecosystem is at.
Great answer. Thank you very much. We've got one question here. Is someone says, I'm on 7 today. Why don't I just move to the latest version? Why consider migrating? What is, how much complexity is there moving from 7 to say the latest version that was launched earlier this year to considering a re-platform altogether?
I can take that if anyone I'm trying to speak. So yeah, if you have to go from Drupal 7 to the latest version, currently, let's say Drupal 11 is launching next year, but let's say you wanted to go into Drupal 10.3, which is a more stable version of Drupal right now, you have to rebuild the whole theme, like, because Drupal 7 was using regular PHP files, but like Drupal 10 uses Twig templates. So you have to rebuild the whole theme and you have to rewrite all your custom modules. So that's why it's not this happened from 7 to 8 transition. From starting Drupal 8, Drupal started to use Symfony as a platform. Because of this, it was even if you have to move from 7 to 8, now you won't be moving to 7 to 8, you'll be moving from 7 to 10.2 or 10.3. So that has like significant amount of development needed because you have to rebuild the whole theme that you built in Drupal 7. I would like Scott or Peter, if you have anything, or Emily, to add on.
I would just say that we do have a team member who was part of the attempt to go from 7 to 10, and that team member is now a part of the replatforming. They have found this year to be replatforming a much more streamlined, easier, achievable process than what obviously that's just our case, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with how we're built in the first place or what have you. But 7 to 10 sounds easier, but replatforming for us in reality has been easier.
Sometimes we talk about the only similarity between Drupal 7 and 10 is the name, but otherwise, to some degree, it could feel a bit like separate CMSs, right? Now, that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but the point there being, just because it has the same name doesn't mean that it's going to take less effort to do that big of a shift. And I think that's something that WordPress has done well to really stabilize the amount of changes and how often those changes are going on, so that the adoption rate of when do you include new features and how much is that going to change, is paced out in a way that I think serves enterprise especially.
I've got a question here about migration. Scott, sorry, you came off mute there. Did you want to add
That's all right, carry on. It's all good.
Okay, cool. So the questions come in is like, okay, how do I get my data across? Is there a simple plugin we can use here? I guess, is this a big bang? Is it drip feed approach? Scott, maybe you want to take this one as you started off mute.
I think this all entirely depends on, it's a very it depends answer, but it does depend on what your existing architecture is, what you're looking to move towards. I think the best thing to line up, so like Peter John said earlier on, we start with an evaluation, and so we look at, particularly from a migration perspective, what is already there, what version of Drupal are you currently on, and how easy is it going to be to migrate that data quite simply from Drupal across to WordPress? Do we have to sanitize and cleanse it in some way? Do we have to, do some different stuff to it, or will it, lift and shift with, with some simple, scripts that we can run to tell the content how to work in the new platform? So I think that's a big it depends in terms of us running that evaluation. But then we do have automated tooling that can do that. I think usually really what we find with our clients is there is a balance of what they want to keep versus what they want to get rid of. It's a good time to to think about cleansing content and updating from an SEO perspective, but also you don't want to lose your rankings, so you have to consider what content to keep. So that's really important. But also it's looking at the stakeholders, the team members you have on board, how much time do they have available? And if you're thinking about how much of that content you want to keep, then some of it can be automated, but we do find that a lot of it also has to be manual. And so we're always trying to reduce the amount of manual effort, but you don't want to end up with huge compromises where you actually end up with an inflexible version of WordPress because you had to build it in a certain way just to host the content that way. So just because your content was built that way before doesn't necessarily mean you want to transfer that content exactly as it was into the new version. And again, like if you're on an older version of Drupal, that's going to become further away from the current reality of how CMS platforms as a whole work, how content is structured. And so, yeah, the it depends is on all of those different moving parts. Yeah, I don't know whether anyone else has got anything to add on that potentially.
Yeah, something we've found, there's kind of a couple categories, right? There's use a partner and have them take care of it all from an automated perspective, right? Something that, depending on the size of migration project, that we found to be a good amount of flexibility is a minimum using some of the views export tools within Drupal to be able to just get stuff out of the database in a standardized CSV, right? So then you got the data, you can do some mutation, some cleanup, especially for repeated content, right? Blog posts and things that you might have thousands or tens of thousands of records for. And then on the WordPress side, you've got options like, WP all import or things like that to help get that in, right? That especially works well from a structured content, repeated structured content. I think, Scott, to your point, obviously, the moment you have more complex campaign pages or things that follow less of a clear pattern, right? That's usually when we get into writing WP CLI scripts or things that are a little bit more custom to really try to automate around that. But at a minimum, the views export module on Drupal, WP all import, those are great places to start to get a bulk of repeat content from Drupal into WordPress, regardless of your structure.
Good stuff. I just want to end on a very quick question. It's probably going to be just a couple of bullet points from all of you here, but in terms of timeframes to migrate, Emily, do you want to just remind us on the timeframe that you were working towards here for this project?
Yeah, sure thing. So we, as a global company, multi-site, and so we set it as a 48-week-long project. So pretty much we did a workshop that kicked off in February of this year. We're going live in January, but we did want to have an extensive R&D process of that. So that's not how long it's taken to migrate. That's the project as a whole. Obviously, the migration is only a piece of that, but I do recommend the timeline that we've taken. Peter John, do you want to just talk to how long the actual migration though is?
Yeah, for migration itself, usually we're trying to do that in about a month. From there, then there's still a when are you launching, and that's part of even the repeatability around automated migrations allows for Delta imports and things even as you get close to launch. So from a website rebuild, to Emily's point, we might see that be if we're doing brand new design, research and discovery between 5 and 12 months. But from a content migration perspective, we're often trying to hit 4 weeks for that.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you. I think we're at time. Great questions, great feedback from the panel. Paige, do you want to bring us back to the final couple of slides? So here I just wanted to reference WP Engine does have an agency partner program. We have thousands of agencies that are a part of this, and if you're interested to find out more how you could potentially work with us and how we can help you grow as an agency and get the most enablement that you can out of WordPress and help you and your clients, please reach out to us. We can help you out. And lastly, Paige, on the next slide, just to conclude, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar. Keep an eye out for an email from our events team. If you're interested in any follow-ups with any of the panelists, perhaps you want to do any workshops specifically to dig into how you might think about migrating across, please reply to that email and we'll be able to facilitate those introductions and follow-ups. It's been a pleasure to host the team, and thank you everyone for joining. Have a good day. Have a good evening.